Do I need a time? Yes. Actually, in a sense, I'm going to offer a Dharma teaching by telling the story of the Buddha, or at least the story of the first part of his life. Over these next 3 nights, we're going to tell the story of the Buddha's life from start to finish. And I'm going to tell the first part, which was, from the Buddha's birth to what's called his going forth, when he left his luxurious life, which I'll tell you all about, and set out on the quest. So the title I was given by Maitravandi was Truth Quest. Where is Maitravandi? He wanted to call it Quest for the Truth, but he thought it sounded too something. Anyway, so it's Truth Quest. So that's what I'm going to be talking about, and I'm going to do something that I think Maitravandi would hate. Is I'm going to give us. I've created an acronym. One of the trainings I went on a couple of months ago was about how to give presentations, and the guy said, "Come up with an acronym." Yeah. So I've come up with an acronym. You know, like SMART goals. You've all heard of that acronym. That's quite famous, isn't it? So my acronym is PIP. Okay, so it doesn't, unless you think it like pip is like a seed, and a seed can grow into a great oak tree or anything, right? So maybe think of pip in that way, something with huge potential. Anyway, so I'm going to divide the Buddha's this part of the Buddha's life story into these 3 parts, and the 3 parts are P for pleasure, I for impermanence, or insight, you can take your pick, and the third is P for purpose. Yeah, PIP. Pleasure, impermanence, and purpose. And let's see how we go. And I'm also going to comment. I'm going to sort of bring in a bit of my own biography into that as well, and I'm also going to ask you questions as we go along. That, in a way, this isn't just a story from long ago that's a nice old mythical story, although there are elements that will appear mythical, especially when I mention miraculous happenings. It's very, like all great stories, it's about us. It's about human life and human potential, and that means us. So yeah, I hope you'll maybe reflect on it, and maybe things will come from it that you want to talk about in your groups tomorrow. Yeah. So yes, so the Buddha's birth, so this is 2,500 years ago. Just in case you're in any doubt, the Buddha was a historical figure. He was a real man who was born in northern India in, about the same time. I guess you had Aristotle teaching in Greece. You had, a whole ferment. You had Lao Tzu, I think, in China. I'm not an expert, but there's a whole ferment of what some people, Bhante in fact is called the Axial Age. This age of kind of ferment of human thought and kind of, in a way, a kind of awakening, you could say, worldwide. A lot of the major faiths arose at that time, 500 years before Christ. And anyway, so there we are in this little kingdom, well, I don't know how little, called the Shakyan tribe, up in northern India, near the Himalayas. And the Buddha-to-be, his name was Siddhartha. The Buddha-to-be's father was called Shuddhadana, and he was a mighty king, we're told. He was unbeaten in warfare. He as a result, he was a great king, because as a result, the whole kingdom was very stable. It was abundant. It was safe, secure. In other words, he was a good king. Yeah, he did exactly what kings are supposed to do: create a sort of stable, lawful realm where people can prosper. And his wife gave birth to Siddhartha in sort of slightly miraculous circumstances, actually standing up, holding on to the bough of a tree in a grove of trees. Trees come into the Buddha's story a lot. She was standing up, holding on to the bough of a tree. And it said, I don't know the significance of this, but the Buddha was born from her side, and that when he could immediately walk, and he walked 10 steps towards the north. I don't know what all this signifies. And like lotuses bloomed in each step. And if you go to India, you can see beautiful artistic sort of representations of the Buddha's birth. So miraculous. and he was immediately kind of, in a sense, kind of conscious and intelligent in a way that, of course, babies aren't normally. Anyway, so make of that what you will. But I want to bring in these miraculous or cosmic elements, because I think one of the lessons from, for example, Bernardo Kastrup's, what's it called, metaphysical idealist view, is that the universe is not what we think. The universe is very mysterious. If life and consciousness is not just these various cells put together for a few years that then die, and that's all we know, then what is it? And probably what it is something that we don't quite know, that we use words like mysterious to describe. So maybe there really are gods and goddesses and tree spirits and all these kind of figures that come through in the Buddhist story and in the Buddhist story. You may well have your own experiences of things that can't be explained or measured by scientific instruments. Anyway, so there's the Buddha. He's born. The King Shuddhadana is delighted because he hasn't had any children. This is his first son, and therefore, any king or indeed queen is concerned, of course, about having an heir, because that secures the future of the realm. And so he's delighted, of course. And it's a healthy boy, and but then there's a bit of a blow, because a really highly respected religious figure, a seer called Asita, turns up and asks to see the baby, and he's highly honoured. So of course the king allows him in, and Asita starts to cry. When he examines the baby, he starts to cry, full of tears. And of course then the king's very concerned that there's something wrong with the child's going to die, his precious son, and asks Asita, and Asita says, no, it's not that. He's a very healthy boy, he's going to live a long life. And of course the king's delighted. But then Asita adds something else. He says, however, the future I see for him is I don't know which way it's going to go. It's going in two directions, his future life, and I don't know. I can't say for sure which of these two it'll be, but it's definitely going to be one of these two. He's either going to become a world-conquering monarch, who's going to subdue all his enemies and create just like you've done here in the Shakyan realm, but he's going to be a world-conquering monarch. He's going to be, what's called a Dharma Raja. And or even better, he's going to become the teacher of the world. He's going to become an enlightened being, the kind of being who's never been seen in this era, who arises very rarely in the history of the universe. He has the potential to become a Buddha. He's going to be one of those two things. And my tears, this is Sita, my tears are because I won't live to see it. This is what I've always wanted, and I know that I won't live to see this. He's an old man by this stage. So the king, having been elated that his son's healthy, is then rather concerned, because you can probably imagine which future he would rather have for his son. Clue, it's the first one. I mean, of course, like any good, worthy citizen, he thinks religious teachers are all very well in their place, so to speak. Yes, he wants a religious life and he makes his offerings to the shrines, but he wants a successful heir. He wants his Shakyan kingdom to thrive. That's the most important thing to him. And so he determines at that very point to do everything in his power to make sure that it's the first prophecy that comes true and not the second. And and his main way of doing that is to give his son every possible pleasure, every possible sensual pleasure that he could want, to make him as happy as possible by giving him every pleasure that he could want. So as a boy, he, just the most incredible toys. It's interesting, there's a fantastic depiction of this story from a guy called Ashvaghosha, who wrote 2,000 years ago, and he describes some of the toys that were given to to the boy, to Siddhartha, the Buddha to be. Like he describes these little golden carts towed by, pulled by little oxen. You can imagine these little white oxen pulling the, for jewels, and like lots of pleasing playmates, and gardens to play in as well. And of course, as he got older, as the boy got older, the boy was very able. He was bright. He was very quick in his studies. He was well liked. He was also a great sportsman. He was really the all-rounder. And as he came of age, then it was more sort of dancing girls and musicians, and those kind of pleasures that he was introducing his son to. The other thing he did was he kept him very much sequestered in the palace. So it sounds a bit strange, but he just lived in the palace. He never went outside into the wider countryside, because the king, Saddhanandi, wanted to keep him in this very happy, pleasurable realm. He didn't want him to see anything disturbing that might set him onto the spiritual path, that might lead him to that destination. And in time, he found him a bride, Yashodhara, who was, you can imagine the beauty of the region, and this really intelligent woman who he thought would be a good match. I mean, in other stories, the Buddha had to win her hand through the sporting contests and this sort of thing. She was quite choosy. Anyway, he ended up with her. And they had a son, and Saddhanandi was delighted, because he thought, this will really keep, fatherhood and attachment to the son, Rahula, will really keep my son bonded here to this life. He won't want to be a holy man if now he's got a son and a family and a wife and so forth. So this was this first phase of the Buddha to be's life, the phase of pleasure, really, and sort of sequestration, to use that word. What's another word for that? So boundary, kind of boundaryness. And I was thinking about this in context of our world and certainly my life, because I think that's largely the kind of world that, in a way, we're lucky enough to live in. We do live in a relatively secure and stable kingdom, and in fact, we're celebrating the 70th anniversary of the current monarch's reign. And by historical standards, it's a very stable and affluent time. In fact, you could basically say we live pretty much like Siddhartha did 2,500 years ago, with no worries about, on the whole, about food or security or pleasures. I mean, in terms of pleasures, that just grows and grows. So much so you can, just as a silly example, if there's a particular film you want to watch, when I was young, you'd have to, go down to Blockbusters and see if you could get the video out of the shot. Oh, sorry, it's out at the moment, but then you spend another half hour trying to find some third-rate comedy. But anyway, now you just, anything you want, Amazon Prime, there it is. So yeah, we really do have pleasure on tap, so to speak, just like Siddhartha. And you could even say, just to stretch it a bit further, that the sort of our contemporary culture of sort of consumer capitalism is sort of, could say Shuddhadana symbolises that, because consumer capitalism, to call it, as a culture, has no interest in us following the spiritual path. It has no interest in us simplifying our life, going forth from earning a lot of money, spending a lot of money. That's just not in its interest. As we know, the Western model depends on growth and economic growth, and that depends on us all producing more and consuming more. And by the way, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think there's like some evil kind of little coterie at the top controlling us. It's just that's what our culture is. That's what has emerged out of the last 300 or 400 years of industrial capitalism, which of course was invented by us here in Britain. So, so in a way, we're Shuddhadana's realm. And certainly, personally, growing up in the 80s, that was very much my training. I wanted to be rich. I wanted to be a millionaire. That was my ambition as a child. Not very noble, but there you go. And I pursued that. I made as much money as I could when I was a kid. I think I was investing in the stock market by the time I was 16, 15, 14. That was when there were all those privatisations of British Gas and all those sorts of things. I was right into that. And I studied economics. I went to Cambridge and studied economics, and so I was right on the path. And I then got a job at JP Morgan as a bond dealer. So that's the career we had in common. And so I was really, I believed in that. I don't know. I was somewhat into pleasure. I think it was also the money was as for a lot of people a symbol of security as well. Like security and also a symbol of happiness. Actually, now I think about it, not quite knowing what the happiness would be, but having the idea that having the money would allow that happiness when I could imagine it. If you sort of mean. And you could have an interesting discussion about the difference between pleasure and happiness. But of course, naturally in our minds, we tend to conflate the two. If I have money, then I can buy pleasure, then I'll be happy. That sort of thing. Or if I have money, I can avoid the pain of insecurity, and then I'll be happy. It's usually one of those two things, you could argue. Anyway, so I think we do live in Shuddha-dana's realm, in a way, in our society. And that's not all bad, as I said. I'd much rather live in this realm than an anarchy or desperately poor society where really it's just about survival. I am grateful that I live in Britain, actually. I don't want to be too down on that. And by the way, where we've got freedoms to have a gathering like this, which would not be the case in many countries or many times in history. And my question to you before I move on to the second stage is, well, to what extent do you seek refuge, as we say in Buddhism, in pleasure, in security, in money? To what extent are you a willing participant in Shuddha-dana's plot to keep his son away from anything spiritual, anything of deeper meaning? Yeah. Because all of us have to cooperate with that for that to work. We are all basically free, so mostly. So it is our choice. Okay, so let me move on to the second phase. So that was P for pleasure. This is I for impermanence. And or ignorance, that's another word I'm using as well. But anyway, I've got three eyes now, haven't I? Anyway, you get the idea. So what happened was, there were lots of songs. I say the Buddha, and basically, it sounds a bit boring to me, but he spent his days surrounded by, dancing girls and people playing music and these beautiful gardens. Anyway, one of the songs they used to sing was about the beauties of the city of Kapilavastu, which was the city that surrounded the palace, down below the palace, right? So naturally, eventually, Siddhartha, as he was then called, got curious. Okay, what's the city like? I'd really like to see the city. Now, you can imagine his father's getting a bit nervous about that. So when Siddhartha asks him if he can visit the city, his father says, okay, but meanwhile he's talking to all his ministers saying, right, we've got to manage this very carefully. Probably a bit like it's happening this weekend, actually. We want the streets cleaned, we want everything to look absolutely best, we're bunting up, and just lots of young, happy, beautiful people. I don't want, I want, because that's all Siddhartha's ever, he's surrounded by young, beautiful people all the time. He has no sense of any other reality in life. So he doesn't want to shock his son in any way. So it's all very carefully choreographed, and he's on his chariot. So they do all this, and then he gets on his chariot, and with his chariot driver, whose name will come back to me in a minute, and they start this journey, and they go out into the city, and it's lovely. He's really enjoying it. You can just imagine these kind of crowds of cheering people. They've never seen this famous prince, and there he is travelling through the city. The story says that the women are up from the balcony saying, "Oh, blessed is his wife." And you can sort of imagine sort of David Beckham-like character. Do you know, I don't know if any of you saw the opening ceremony at the Olympics where David Beckham's kind of in a speedboat driving up to the. This is 10 years ago, but his kind of hair in the wind, and it's kind of coming to the Olympic Stadium. So a bit like that, you can imagine. Anyway, so there's Siddhartha travelling through the streets, and then the gods arrange for somebody not young and beautiful to suddenly be there on the street. And the Buddha's Siddhartha is a bit surprised, and he's like, who is that man there? Who why is his hair like white instead of black? And why are his limbs kind of bent? And why is he leaning on a stick to support himself? What's happened to him? What's wrong with him? And his charioteer, can anyone tell me the name? What's his charioteer's name? Chandika. Chanda, thank you. Says, and again, he's not supposed to be saying this, but again, the gods kind of, they intervene. Says, oh, sire, he's old. He's an old man. He was once young and full of vigor like you, and handsome and capable, but he's suffering old age, the destroyer of vigor, the destroyer of memory, of beauty. And Siddhartha is really, really shocked. Now this is strange to us, because like, what? He must have seen an old bloke. You could look at this. You could look at this kind of metaphorically in the sense that maybe he just never really seen an old person. Like, I mean, the story is very clear he hadn't. But if you want to sort of interpret it a bit, you could say maybe he'd never really seen an old person. And I don't know if you can relate to this. I certainly remember when I was young. Of course, I saw old people around me, my grandparents and many others, but I never quite made the connection that they were once like me. Again, probably rationally I would, but I never thought of them as once being young and vigorous and ambitious and optimistic and and all that stuff. And even the photos were black and white, so it didn't even look quite real anyway. Even if you did see photos of them when they were young. Probably less case these days. But I think in that sense he deeply saw that reality, and he was shocked, and he said, how can all these people be... Oh, that's right, he asked Chandra, he said, so does this happen to anyone else, or is he just really unlucky? Like, what's... And Chandra said, no, this is again, definitely not acting according to the orders from the king. No, this is all of our fate. This is what happens to everyone who's born. If they're lucky, they get old. This is what happens to us all. It happened to you as well. And Siddhartha's shocked, really shocked. And that's kind of the end of the outing. He says, let's go back. So they get, he's like, how can I sport in this way when that's the fact, a reality waiting for me and for all the people I love. So he goes back, and the king's a bit perturbed to hear that. He kind of ups the pleasure, to try and kind of take the Buddha's Siddhartha's mind off this. And Siddhartha decides to go on another. He wants to go into town again. So same preparations, all the rest of it. Goes out in the chariot. This time he sees a woman whose belly is really swollen. She's calling out piteously for her mother. Her limbs are all emaciated. She's panting for breath. And again, Siddhartha says, "And what's happened to her? What's happened to her? Has there been an accident, or what's wrong with her?" And again, Chandra explains and says, "Well, no, she's ill. She has some awful sickness, and that's happened. That's what's happened to her. She was healthy before, just like you, but now she's sick." And again, Siddhartha says, "Well, so is this? Can this happen to other people?" "Yes, it happens to everyone. Everyone gets sick. It'll happen to you as well." And again, Siddhartha's shocked. On the third trip out, he sees his third great sight, which is he sees a man being carried on a bier, a funeral bier, and he says, "What is happening there? There's this man. He's been carried by 4 people. He's in his glorious clothes, but he's not moving, and everyone is wailing around him. What's happening here?" And Chandra explains, this man has died. These are his family. There's no life left in him. There's no sense awareness. There's no consciousness. He's just like an old log. He'll just be disposed of. He'll be burned. So the Buddha's, again, profoundly shocked, and not least when Chanda tells him that, yes, again, this is the fate of all human beings, everyone he loves, everyone he doesn't know, everyone he knows, but also himself. And again, the Buddha's response is, how can all these people be happy and joyous, and while there's old age and sickness and death are realities that await all of them? And he's thrown into quite a sort of depression when he comes back to the palace. So all of you are probably thinking the same thing that we all think, which is, well, that's just life, right? Old age sickness, that's just life. And that's probably what Chanda said to him, that's just what happens. And we're happy because you just have to get on with life, because that's just it, that's just life. We have that saying, don't we, c'est la vie. We're going to get old and sick and die, we don't know when. There we go, it's best not to think about it and just get back to the pleasure god. Get back to Netflix, get back to just, enjoy your life. And in a way you can sort of see the logic of that. Of course, one doesn't want to live in a state of depression. I mean, I would say, what would I say about, I've said a bit about myself and that sort of failure of imagination. I would imagine for all of us though in this room, in fact, almost certainly for all of us in this room, there's been some kind of insight into the fragile, contingent, impermanent nature of this life. And that might even be what brought you here, I don't know, indirectly or directly. Like, all of us have experienced old age, sickness and death. All of us have. Plus other reversals of fortune. I'm speaking personally, I've always been really healthy. I've exercised every day my whole life. I've been really sporty. And I fell ill with COVID a couple of years ago, and then got long COVID and was basically hardly able to work for over a year. That was a real shock to me. Of course, I've known lots of sick people, but suddenly it was happening to me. And that challenged my whole identity. My identity as my work as a fundraiser, my identity as a healthy, youthful, middle-aged guy, was all kind of out the window. And I was having to tell people, sorry, I can't talk right now. I'm too tired, and I have to, can only speak to one person a day, and I can only work for 2 hours a day. All this kind of thing. So we've either had experience like that, or of course we know people who've suffered sickness. Obviously, we know people who've suffered old age. Maybe we're elderly ourselves, and death as well. So maybe you've had experiences, well, you've all had experiences like that, but maybe they've touched you deeply. And I think that's the lesson of this, is not that Siddhartha was this naive guy, but that the contrast between this sort of, sequestered, pleasure-based life and the reality that he saw outside the palace, that's the point of the story. And the fact is that he really took that on. He took that seriously. He didn't just dismiss it and go back to the well, he did go back to pleasure gardens, but you're about to see what happens next. So I think that's really the lesson here. And I guess the question for you is, what is the insight? What's the insight into impermanence that's really touched your heart, that you haven't been able to just dismiss in the way that, rather our society does. And it's all these points are well made elsewhere, but the fact that death in our society is something that we basically barely see. It happens in a hospital usually, or a hospice. The body's handled by the undertakers, and then we go to a cremation. That's not the way traditionally death is dealt with, where people would die in the home. You'd be living with your grandparents. You'd see their corpse. You'd probably one of the people carrying the corpse. You'd then burn it on the riverside. This still happens in India. You can see it, and that's the world that the Buddha grew up in. And in fact, most human beings have always grown up in death being a reality that's around you. And sickness not being something that you can just kind of beat with the right drugs and all that sort of thing, but actually just a really dangerous reality that's there and can kill you any time from birth to any time. So that's my question for you before I go on to this third section, is what's the kind of insight into impermanence that's touched you? I'm sure all of you have got something in your life, maybe even quite recently. And it needn't be old age, sickness, death. It could be the loss, the breakup of a marriage or a relationship. That's another loss, isn't it? It's another kind of death. Being fired or made redundant from your job, losing your home, maybe being repossessed, or whatever it is, or a fire. Basically, an insight into the sort of unreliability of of life, that there's not that solid ground that we can rely on. Sorry to bring it down as the proceedings, but that is the reality, isn't it? That is the reality that we all have to face. I think the lesson from it, which we're about to go into, is what Maitreya Bandhu is drawing out today from Paul Gilbert, which is we do have to turn towards that and the pain of that, and we don't just be lost in that. We don't just be stuck in that. We don't spend the rest of our life depressed because somebody died or a relationship ended. There are examples in literature, aren't there, like Great Expectations, where it's tragic, the woman who never takes off her bridal gown. What's her name, Maitreya Bandhu? Havisham, thank you, Miss Havisham, who from is elderly, still wearing her wedding gown. She won't let go of the fact that she was jilted at the aisle. Yes, that's really tragic. So we're not saying that, but we're saying really, and this is what the Buddha's story is saying, is really turning towards the uncomfortable realities of life, particularly in relation to impermanence. So then we come to the third part of the PIP, purpose. Yeah. So this is where the Buddha is particularly impressive. Up to this point, yeah, he's successful, handsome young guy, but basically just living a dolce vita in this palace. But it's now what he does next that is the start of his really impressive life. He decides that he wants to go and reflect on this. Yeah, he can't enjoy the pleasure. His father, of course, brings in new, more beautiful dancing girls and courtesans and musicians and whatever the pleasures are he's into, and more beautiful gardens. But he just can't enjoy it anymore. So he decides to go out to a forest glade. Now the king won't let him do that alone, so he sends some of the minister's sons to keep him company and be nice and jovial around him and boost his spirits. Go and cheer yourself up and have a picnic. And but actually, when the Buddha comes to the forest, he goes and sits on his own under a tree, and just quite spontaneously starts to meditate. And he reflects on what he's seen, of this old man, old age, sickness and death. And his phrase that he says to himself, or his reflection is quite interesting. He says, it would not be fitting, it would not be right for me to carry on living the way I have, knowing what I now know about the fate of all human beings, of my fate and all human beings' fate. So it's also the arising of compassion. He's sort of horrified in a way for his own sake, but it's also for all beings, like everybody is going to suffer this fate. And in that moment, it said that his intoxication with youth, with life, with vigor and health, just disappeared in that moment. He was still young and healthy, but his intoxication with that had gone. And I think that is probably a characteristic of youth. I was certainly intoxicated with youth when I had it, and still have been to some degree with life and health. There is something good about that. You do, of course, young people. That's part of, and some of you are young. That is one of the great things. Is that great optimism, that kind of, idealism and wide-eyed kind of vigor for life. But that intoxication just disappeared in a moment as he sat and reflected and meditated. And at that very moment, guess who the gods sent now? They sent what's called a shramana. And a shramana is a wandering holy man, a bit like a Sita, who's dedicated their lives to just the pursuit of truth, the quest for truth. And the quote I picked out here is from the shramana is, "I wander without ties or expectations in search of the highest good." So they live completely simply, just wearing rags or whatever they find. They just live on food that they beg from householders, from villages, and spend all the time meditating, talking about the nature of reality, seeking truth, seeking enlightenment. So he meets one of these people who, in a way, magically appears. Guess what? After he's just been meditating, and you may have already experienced that on this retreat, when you really step towards spiritual practice, spiritual life, suddenly slightly miraculous things happen. You meet people, or things happen that really point the way. And at that moment, Siddhartha knew what he wanted to do with his life. He found his purpose. He wanted to be a shramana. He wanted to wander leave behind this complicated, luxurious life and live a really simple life like this Shramana, just dedicated to meditation and seeking the truth. So he did what any good son would do. He went back to his father, King Shuddhadana, and said, I've decided what I want to do with my life. And he got the kind of reception that you might have got when you first told your parents you wanted to be whatever you wanted to be, which was, I don't think that's a good idea. And probably quite stronger than that, actually, because Shuddhadana not only refused, but he actually then he put in a guard around the palace. So actually it was no longer possible for Siddhartha to leave the palace. There's no question of leaving the palace anymore. He thought, this is a critical moment, I just have to stop this right now. I really have to stop this right now. So there was guards put around. There's huge, great gates on the city, double barred. There's just, he was really clear, my son is not going to leave and live that life. You can imagine for a king that would be actually deeply shameful as well, to imagine your son going and living like a vagrant, basically, in the way that I've just described. The gods helped again. Firstly, that night, he's in the palace, and there's the musicians and the dance girls, all that stuff, and the gods cause them all to just fall asleep like that. Just suddenly they're all asleep, and the Buddha looks around him, and all these beautiful young men and women are just kind of like looking awful, just like laid out, just kind of drooling, and just like how most of us look when we're just woken up in the morning. There they all are, right? And suddenly this sort of mirage of the allure and the beauty just disappears in a moment. And he thinks, oh, the gods are helping me here. Because what they also do is suddenly the doors of the palace, which were locked, just open spontaneously. And the guards are asleep beyond the doors. And he thinks, this is meant to be. I'm going to leave tonight. And it's said, I haven't talked much about his wife and his son, but it's said that he took and again you see this in the art, he took one last look at his wife and his son and was just in tears to leave them. It's probably something you're going to end up talking about tomorrow. But anyway, it was a great wrench for him, but he felt he was doing this for them as much as for anyone else, for all humanity, to find the truth. So he leaves the palace, but then how's he going to travel? If he gets on a horse, he's going to make a racket, as the clip-clop across the paving stones, and then and how can he even get out of the city anyway, because of these huge barred gates? But the particular type of god called the yakshas, they come and they lift up the hooves of Kantaka, the horse, his marvellous horse, that's beautiful, and so Kantaka is able to carry the Buddha out of the city or to the gates with making no noise, because the gods are carrying the hooves. And then miraculously, these huge double-barred gates that said even a herd of elephants couldn't get through just open, and off he goes. And there's a very touching moment where basically he's with Chandra again, his charioteer, and they go out they travel many miles through the night to this forest grove where a bunch of Shramanas, these ascetics, these holy men, are practicing. And the Buddha, Chandra, of course, is trying to talk him out of it. Don't do it. Apart from anything, he's going to be in massive trouble with the king, but for driving him to this place. But also, the Buddha's just so determined. Siddhartha at this point, sorry, and he's got his glorious locks. He cuts off his hair. He gives his glorious robes to one of these holy men and takes their rags. Gives the horse and his jewelled headdress and everything to Chandra. Says, "Take this back to the king. This is it. I'm leaving. I'm leaving this life, and I won't come back until I've found the truth, until I've found the answer to old age, sickness, and death." And that's how they part, and that's where I'm going to leave the story tonight. I suppose I'll just mention a couple of my own reflections on this, and then probably finish up. Probably all of us need to meet someone like that Shramana. We need to have that, what's called the Buddha's fourth sight, somebody who gives us confidence that there's another life possible. And actually for me it was an order member who I met in Nepal, in Kathmandu. My big my big impermanence / insight experience was it's a bit embarrassing, but anyway, I'll have to tell you. Was something that will sound really trivial, but to me was really a big shock. I was very big into rowing. I was the president of Cambridge University Rowing Club, the lightboat rowing club. I'm too small to be one of those, but a lightboat rowing club. And I put all my heart and soul into winning the boat race, and we lost the boat race. And I was really just very depressed about that. And I put everything I knew about how to live into that. And so after that, I never quite believed in self-development anymore. I had loads of self-development training, and it hadn't worked. And so I never quite believed in the power of self anymore. But I knew I needed something bigger. So everyone else was getting jobs in investment banking or consultancy, and I said, no, I want to take some time off. I've got to find. I don't know what it was. I just got to not just keep doing that goal-oriented madness. I just wanted. I want to. I don't know what I was just seeking something. I had no idea what it was. Anyway, I went to Nepal, did trekking and that sort of thing, and met this guy called Amoghachita, who was teaching meditation in Kathmandu. Amoghachita means fearless heart or soul, heart or mind. And he was my shramana, if you like. He was somebody who was like a Westerner, an Englishman, probably about my age now, and giving his whole life to this. What we're doing here, growth to potential to flowering to flourishing, and what's more, he was teaching others, and I had a very strong experience of meditation. I mean, very strong, like I've hardly had since. Really blissful, and I couldn't believe it. It was lovely, and all I was doing was just sitting with the breath, and it was like nothing I had apart from ecstasy or something. It was just so strong, and so that in a way he was my foresight. He started telling me about Buddhism and what the Buddha taught. So I think we all need someone like that to kind of show us that there's another life possible. And so when I got back to London, I was starting my job at JP Morgan, and I did 3 years with them. But meanwhile, I was going to the London Buddhist Centre in Bethnal Green. And coming on retreats like this was particularly powerful. It showed me that another mind was possible. The kind of, you're probably already starting to have it even on day 2. There's a kind of opening and a softening and a kind of a delight, a growing delight that you can experience on retreat. Yeah, there's ups and downs too, but that and a sense of connection with others, and that's what I started to experience as if for the first time, probably for the first time. And the more I had of that, the less interested I was in selling bonds 11 hours a day on a trading floor. So I eventually, in a sense, did my own going forth. Even though I'd worked really hard to get that job, it was really hard to get that job, really, really, really hard to get that job. I gave it up and took a pay cut to go and become a fundraiser for India for a Buddhist charity called Carol Trust. I think my pay cut, this is in 1999, was from £70,000 a year to £8,000 a year. That was my renunciation. And for someone who wanted to be a millionaire since they were a kid, that was a big renunciation, believe me. I think the only reason I did it was because I just had this kind of youthful recklessness that, if it doesn't work out, I'll just go back. Anyway, so I suppose, that would be my third question for you to reflect on would be, well, in a way, what's your fourth sight? What's kind of inspired you? What's given you a sense of purpose? And then a sub-question could be, and what is it that would be the next thing for you to sort of, go forth from, to give up, to renounce in aid of following that purpose? Yeah. So I made the decision that to follow this, I'd be much better off, in that case, living and working with other Buddhists, doing something useful for society, rather than just making a load of money for myself at JP Morgan. So that was the clear logic for that. But what would it be? I mean, that was quite a dramatic one. It carries on through life, of course, and always has another step to go of renunciation. But what would it be for you? What would be the simplification of life that would allow you to focus more on your purpose, your greater purpose? Okay, so that's what I want to say. That's the pip. That's the pip. That's the first part of the story of Siddhartha's life, with his youth in the pleasure gardens of Kapilavastu, under the watchful eye of his jealous father, the good king Shuddhadana, and then his great insights into the realities of human life, of old age, sickness and death, and just all the change that we're subject to. And then, actually having the courage to live out that vision that he had. Not, as most of us do, to just kind of ignore it. Buddhism talks a lot about ignorance, and it's interesting, that phrase, it is a kind of ignorance, isn't it? We willfully choose to ignore the realities of death. We all do it all the time, and impermanence. So he had the courage to not do that. I think that's what's really extraordinary about Siddhartha. I mean, what Saddhanandi is going to say about him is more extraordinary in a way, but that was that courage to go forth and really pursue what he saw as his purpose in life. Was the start of something very special, and the reason that we're all here today, of course, 2,500 years ago. So there we go. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Amalavajra. That was just such a generous talk. It was very, very charming and thought-provoking. So easy to listen to, and also so much to think about. I really enjoyed your evocation of courage, like the Buddha's courage.